Hello, and welcome to Of Significance, the spooky statistics episode. It's the scary podcast about what's relevant, what's important, and what's terrifying. It's where we address whether the numbers and analytics we see daily are incredibly boostful or nearly insignificant. I'm your every-person host, Brent Buckright, here with two experienced experts who have been analyzing big data since before it was big. They put the boo in Boolean statistics. It's Dr. Nathan Woods and Dr. Steve Bronars.
That was a great introduction.
Thank you.
I can't do the spooky voice though.
You don't have to.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just flummoxed candy corn sticking between my teeth.
It is the spookiest time of the year, and we wanted to celebrate this holiday season by bringing up what is many people's number one fear: math. We've got monsters, scary movies, and everything Halloween in our own little treehouse of horrors. To kick things off, are there vampires in your backyard? Surveys say maybe, but we say unsure. There are articles that come out every year reporting the number of, quote, real vampires living in the United States. And these are people who identify as vampires. They often drink blood for proclaimed health benefits and have rituals around their vampirism. So most of these, popcorn news sites like USA Today cite a 2015 survey by the Atlanta Vampire Alliance. It's not clear that any of the news sources that cite the Vampire Alliance actually look at any of the underlying data, because if they did, they would know that the actual surveys come from 2006 and 2009 and not 2015, which is scary on its own. But basically, there were two studies, and they surveyed together roughly 950 individuals, all from, quote, all paths within the vampire community and across the world. To start with, they claim that there are 5,000 to 10,000 individuals in the United States living as vampires. And I want to ask you two, methodologically, how would we assess whether that makes sense or not?
I've thought about this, Brent. I read that article that you sent. And first of all,
wait.
Maybe
you prepared?
Yes. Maybe if we think back to 2009, it was a scary time.
It was.
Markets were crashing. Maybe people were drinking blood because it was cheaper than other beverages. But seriously,
not enough economists talk about how blood is a substitute.
It's not a luxury item. It's an inferior good. But I thought about this figure, 5,000. That's like one out of every 66,000 residents of the U.S. is a vampire. That means that your chance, if you interviewed 950 people at random, you have less than a 1.5% chance of even getting one person saying they're a vampire. Because it's not a very common thing.
I mean, I think the thing that's scary about their approach to me is that the survey they conducted was among people who were already identifying as vampires. Then they scaled up their number based off of the population.
So just to be clear, and I also read the article. I didn't realize we were supposed to admit that we prepared before recording, but I don't remember. But the 950 are people that were already identifying as vampires.
Correct.
And that was the group that responded from some larger list of vampires from which that sample was drawn.
Yes.
And my question would be, how did they get that larger list?
Nathan, you love stratified samples, though.
I do. And I think there probably are different kinds of vampires depending on lots of things.
I thought from the article, he said, we went into this like gothic clothing place where they sell like maybe...
And it just happened to be that a vampire showed up, and then that person didn't respond to questions. non-response bias.
and didn't know at the time what the HBO First Blood show was all about. So that lose some credibility there. But I would say that if you go to
True Blood,
Yeah.
True Blood,
Is that what it's called? True Blood?
it's not First Blood. I think you're thinking of Rambo.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Rambo. Yeah, First Blood.
Not a vampire.
True
a lot
blood.
of blood.
Yeah. Either one. There was a lot of blood. But they were in New Orleans, which, I mean, they said it's about the per capita number of vampires in New Orleans is about the same anywhere. Well, I think that's off because Anne Rice and whatever that one is, I'll misname that thing too. But Interview with the Vampire and all those books, didn't they take place in New Orleans?
Yes, there's a lot of vampire spooky culture in New Orleans itself. Of places they have like some of the most ghost tours, for example. And I'm certain that the cultural climate is going to incline more people to either aggregate there or perhaps identify in some other weird way. I think the thing that's interesting to me about this is if I'm looking at something that's relatively rarely occurring, and I say 1 out of every, 66,000 chance of someone, saying that they are a vampire, there's a statistical reality that is, if I have enough people, then I can find a lot of people who claim that, but I would still think of that as very rare. That 5,000 might be a big number. It might be a small number. It depends on who I'm comparing it to.
Well, sure. And even just in New Orleans, where they're thinking there might be 50, that is a very small share of the residents of New Orleans.
Well, and then the other thing is that, let's say you went out and talked to 1,000 people. Like I said, if it was a random sample, it was not stratified to, go into areas where you think vampires hang out, which I think I'd go to Barrow, Alaska, because I saw that movie 30 Days of Night. And
is it called that, or is it called something else?
It could be called, it could be another Rambo movie. I don't know. But in Alaska, in Barrow, Alaska, it's like dark. They didn't mention that in the article, like vampires don't go out in the sunlight, but it's like dark for like a month, no sunlight. So that's ideal for a vampire.
I think
if you can put up with the cold.
I do think I guess the definition of a vampire is somebody who will drink somebody else's or some animal's blood.
Yes.
On a routine enough basis. But is that really a vampire? Because it's a great point, Steve. Yep. I mean, if you can go out in the sun.
Yeah. What kind of vampire is that?
Well, they also, I should add, have a classification of psychic vampires. These are people who drain your energy. So anyone who's a fan of What We Do in the Shadows will know the psychic vampire character who drones on incessantly, causing people to fall asleep in meetings.
I could be one of those. I might be one of those. What I was going to say is that you get this sample of 1,000 if you don't stratify. And I think, Brent, you're asking, like, how do we know this number if you don't stratify? You're either going to have 0 or 1, right? If you have 1, if every 1 out of 1,000 people are vampires, all of a sudden you're up to like 66 times or something more likely than it really is. You're going to say, like, every 1 out of 1,000, then I would have like 330,000 vampires in the U.S. Or you get 0 and you go, there are none. So I do think that when you have such a rare event and you're trying to sample it, it's a challenging thing. And you really are forced to try to say, where can we find respondents that are going to say yes, and then adjust it like they apparently try to do in this survey.
Yeah, right. And then there's all kinds of assumptions that are built into those adjustments, the people that you ended up talking to. Like if you needed to find vampires, you might go to the Gothic bookstore. You might go to the Association of Vampires and try and interview people. But then you wonder if that's obviously a representative sample of anything.
Right.
Because it's not.
No.
So those adjustments are fraught. And so, yeah, getting to the idea of, do I believe in the 5,000 number? No. I bet you're going to ask, is there a right way to do this?
I was actually going to say fraught, more like frightened.
Yeah. You know what, to me, was the scariest thing about that article was they were talking to like college professors who waste their time studying this stuff. Like,
Well,
that's scary as a taxpayer. It's like, what the heck are you doing there?
I don't know. I don't know about that, Steve.
Okay.
I think whatever they're teaching is at least as entertaining as whatever you shared with your students.
Well, that might be true. But didn't you notice it? They were like, hey, we talked to this person at Georgia Tech and this person at, I don't know, Boise State or somewhere. I was like, wow. I wasn't expecting them to talk to academic experts.
But this is another perfect example. Like, if I've got a large enough number of researchers, professors, people studying anything, there are going to be a small number of them that are studying weird, wacky stuff that you wouldn't think to actually study. It's just a numbers game.
1 out of 66,000 professors
Are studying vampires. Yeah.
That's right.
All right, that sound means it's time to move on. It's time to dust off your favorite horror movies, but sometimes the classics just don't deliver the same spooks they once did. You might wonder to yourself, what is the scariest movie I could watch? Well, Broadband Choices, a comparison tool for broadband deals, took a crack at that question with their Science of Scare project, during which they tracked the heart rates of 50 people of various ages and had them watch over 100 hours of scary movies. So this study, which is obviously fun, it's a low stakes study with a small sample size, and was also limited to the 50 highest rated horror movies according to IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes. It's fun. So we're, all the comments and criticism we might have of it is taken with jest. But essentially, they measured the resting heart rate on average, and then measured the average movie heart rate for any individual movie, and then ranked movies based off of the most dramatic change. So, according to the heart rates of participants, no movie scared people more than Sinister, a 2012 horror thriller that stars Ethan Hawke as a true crime writer who is investigating a string of grisly family murders. So essentially, this study tries to look at your heart rate, your beats per minute, and tries to say, what's the scariest movie based off of just that characteristic? Are there other characteristics that we might need to consider when evaluating what is truly the scariest movie? What factors should we control for?
And Brent, what was the scariest movie they found?
The scariest one was Sinister.
Have you watched that movie? Have you watched that
I
movie?
have watched that movie. Yeah. There's probably one part in it you can actually, I can remember as being distinctly kind of scary. And when you look at the average heart rate for that movie, because they report that movie by movie, you can literally see the minute in the movie when that scene comes up based off of people's heart rates, which is kind of fun.
Nathan, have you watched that movie?
I don't watch scary movies. I think on the list, I've watched all the scary movies that were came out earlier than like 1993.
That's what
Anything after 1993, haven't watched it.
Yeah. Other than Love Actually, have you watched anything after 1993?
Love Actually is a beautiful movie. Wasn't scary at all.
Yeah.
No, the scariest movies I watch are any movie I'm watching with my kids when the actors start to get somehow romantically inclined, because the tension I can feel from my kids knowing that I'm sitting in the same room.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to leave that room for everybody's sake.
So heart rate to me seems like probably a good proxy, but not the most useful one, because there's different kinds of things that make movies scary. So you might have some that they've got one scene in it that's particularly remarkable. Like, I know every millennial I know is terrified of driving behind a car that a truck that ships logs from the scene in Final Destination 2. And I don't remember anything else about that movie, but people are still frightened by that one scene.
Steve, did you know he knew millennials?
I'm a millennial. I'm a millennial. That's my cohort.
I'm scared to death.
Yeah. But Nathan,
I mean,
think
wait, Nathan, you're Gen X, and Steve, you're the greatest
something.
generation.
I'm the greatest generation.
Definitely not the silent generation.
Yeah. So Brent, you were talking about Sinister, and there's a point in it which is like really scary, and then Final Destination really scary, and your heart rate increases at that point.
Yes.
And I think there's an element in which a scary movie has those kind of scenes. It doesn't need to be like that, continuously. That's almost like cartoonish or something. And so some of the more, maybe it's suspenseful as opposed to just scary, have these, scenes in the movie where it's very scary, and then it'll, bring you back down to a calmer point. So I think maybe the scariest should be measured more by, how much of a jump you see in the heart rate, or some other measure. You could be like, how many times did you cover your eyes in the movie or look away or something like that, or
Right. I don't know
those kind of measures.
If you looked at the heart rates throughout a movie, and I've got a moment where I send people's heart rate through the roof for 2 scenes, that can dramatically increase the average heart rate over the course of the movie, compared to a movie that is maybe like a cosmological horror or an existential horror, where you feel things that are going to linger with you for a long time. And the if I were to take the mode heart rate, I might say this movie is actually scarier because it has just caused this general anxiety in a person.
Yeah, I mean, when I do think, in all seriousness, when we first talked about these kind of scary movies, the one that I remembered was from when I was a tiny child. Something Wicked This Way Comes. I have no idea if that's as scary as I remember it being, but boy, I remember it being scary, and so that lasted forever.
Right.
So it's not in the moment when I was actually watching it that you could capture the full effect of that in my heartbeats per minute.
I think that, to me, one of the scariest movies was not on that list was Silence of the Lambs. And I'm not even sure if it's because your heart rate goes up, or it was like, the Anthony Hopkins, Hannibal Lecter character is very creepy and all that. And so to me, one of the things that I thought was interesting about this approach is that they're trying to come up with a different measure, but maybe you would want to at some point do a correlation or something between what people say was the scariest movie and then these kind of biometric measures, so that you would see what is it that causes people to think the movie was scary. Was it the jumps in their heart rate, or did it have nothing really to do with that? And so I think, they come up with a different ranking than other people might come up with. But to me, the interesting thing would be, what is it that causes people to think a movie is scary? And is there a measure that they propose really all that correlated with these other rankings, that if you just ask people, hey, among these 10 movies, which one did you think was scarier than the others?
No. Now, one thing I did like, I think, about what they described in the study is that they did have 2 separate, right? Kind of, they had the jump scare,
Yes,
on its own versus the kind of the overall. And I kind of liked that as a sensitivity, that you could say, this one may not be as scary top to bottom, but it had the scariest, brief moment. So I like that. The other thing that I didn't love, and they acknowledged it, but there's a limit to which movies they could show you. So there might be other movies that they didn't have in their list to show people that were awfully darn scary that nobody in the study saw.
Well, I think the thing that was interesting to me was how much it leaned toward recent movies being scarier, just as part of the possible roster. And part of that is a function, I think, of when movies come out. Now that IMDb exists, people can throw up reviews. You have to be really passionate about, say, The Exorcist to go into IMDb and recall what you felt when you first saw it. And then additionally, when you watch movies now, they've already got baked in the traditions and tropes that other horror movies had already done before. So I go back and I watch The Exorcist and I feel, it's not that scary. But that's because I've seen all the things that made it scary in movies that came later.
Yeah.
There's an endogeneity type problem there.
Yeah, and I think that back in the old time movies, when there wasn't as much graphic violence, one of the things that would make you scary is that you could see something coming that would harm the character that you were really invested in the movie, and they're unaware of it. And so in my mind, in those movies, you're like, and it's like that. It's going to be like that in some of the Friday the 13th and other movies like that. Like, don't go in that room. Don't go there. Don't do this. Don't do that. And you're like trying to interact with the character in the movie to warn them of what is lurking there. And I think, I don't know, I haven't actually seen most of the movies that were in the top 10, so I don't know what made them scary. But I'm guessing you're right, that it's it was weighted heavily towards more recent ones. And I think it just has a different way of trying to scare people, given how, kind of experienced they are at watching movies that are trying to scare people. They always had to come up with something new.
Ooh. So that sound means that we've got to wrap up with our last segment. And in this, I just want to talk a little bit about our own Halloweens. Steve, Nathan, what are some of your favorite Halloween traditions?
Well, I'll dive in. Couple things. First of all, bobbing for apples and carefully keeping track of how many attempts each of the siblings made, how many you actually got, and then comparing the rates to see whether or not there were differences between siblings.
Yeah, no more. It's spooky season, so we're not drawing names out of a hat. We're pulling marbles out of an urn, or we're pulling apples out of a tub.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's age-old Woods family tradition.
Yeah. So one of my Halloween traditions, my husband loves this old Raggedy Ann and Andy cartoon called The Pumpkin Who Couldn't Smile. And it's atrocious. It's a terrible cartoon. They basically tried to make an animated movie to capitalize on Halloween in the same way that there are animated movies about like Christmas or Thanksgiving. Like, what is the spirit of Christmas? And so they have to form this whole construction by like, what's the real spirit of Halloween? That just doesn't work, because the central character in it is this jack-o'-lantern, this pumpkin that always cries about not having been picked by anyone. And so Raggedy Ann and Andy have to get this special pumpkin to a little boy who needs to remember the spirit of Halloween. It's atrocious. All the characters in it are so hateable, but we watch it every year because actually I have no idea why we watch it every year. You should watch it. It's like 15 minutes. It's a terrible, terrible movie.
Steve, what about you?
Well, I kind of we have 2 French bulldogs, Cosmo and Luna, and I don't think they really enjoy dressing up in costumes, but they're very cute. And then you dress up in costumes. They don't really know what's going on. You take pictures. So that's pretty cool. I like doing that.
Great. Well, we'd like to give a special production shout out to George Karenko and Brian Stanmeyer for helping with this episode. Happy Halloween, Stat Pack. Enjoy the holiday and make sure you get into the Halloween holiday spirit. Well, that's been this episode of Significance. This episode's been brought to you by Edgeworth Economics, a leader in economic consulting, and with the help of our producers, Kimberly Krewald, Ryan Deal, and Brian McLamara of Brand Ready Media, with music by Armwell Lang. Thanks for listening, Stat Pack, and always remember to check your assumptions.